So I'm not going to tell my story. More importantly, I want to get to Heidi and the webinar and why we're all here today. So if you have any questions, please direct them to me. If you are in crisis and you want to talk to one of us, please let me know. But more importantly, please reach out to 988 or the crisis text line 741-741, or a whole other host of resources that we do have available. So please feel free to reach out. So with that being said, Heidi, my mentor, my friend, the person that really got me started in this, the person who has really started efforts across the country as far as talking about being an attempt survivor and what we can do to help prevent them from dying by suicide. So Heidi, this is all yours. Go ahead.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. Thanks for asking me to be here today. And thanks for the wonderful introduction, which always embarrasses me, but I'm trying to get used to it. I got started, I think in 1998, 3 years after my brother died by suicide. And I realized that I was watching all these shows and movies and they always had a suicide scene, or not always, but there were so many. I forget how many I counted in 1 week. It was incredible. And it got me thinking that, you know, they always show like it's always an option. And so I started to research suicide. That's when I started to find out what a big problem it was, and also that nobody talks about it. And so it began as an outreach program of my church, and then it became Feeling Blue Suicide Prevention Council. And then I went across the country and throughout Pennsylvania doing QPR and assist trainings and assessing and managing suicide risk and things. So, and I try to use my own experience, not only as an attempt survivor, but also having lost someone to suicide, and living, you know, my whole childhood living with people with mental illness. I like to incorporate it into everything I do. Why is this not working? There we go. So the workshop is designed for families who have someone experiencing suicidal behaviors or attempts. And I'm going to talk in this webinar, I'm going to talk about why I got interested in this and why I felt there was a need for it, the topics that I'm going to cover in the workshop, and the content that within the topics that I'm going to cover. I just want to say something right away. When I talk about attempt survivors, I also mean people who are suicidal, who struggle with chronic suicidality like I do, or who have suicidal ideation, or, you know, attempts. It's like a spectrum, but I can't say that every time, so I just shorten it to attempt survivors. So I just want that to be known. And families can be family of origin, it can be family of choice, it can be support people, whatever you or whoever you consider the people you want to go to in times of crisis. So I think Govan touched on this a little bit. There just aren't any resources available out there for attempt survivors, and there are even fewer for families of attempt survivors. But we know that there is a demand for it, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about how this all came about. And this is a picture. My brother Jeff is on the left. And this is around the age that he was hospitalized for suicidal behavior. My mother walked in on him while he was writing a suicide attempt, a letter. And so he was hospitalized, I think, for a couple weeks. And he came home and I didn't know how to interact with him. It was weird. I was afraid if I said something, would I make him upset? Would he then go on to try again, to actually attempt, or would he possibly die? And I just didn't know, I didn't know what to do. So I avoided him, and that was the worst thing I could have done. You know, he comes home from this hospitalization and he's feeling ostracized and alone, and, you know, no one's talking about it. So, you know, in hindsight, I know what I should have done, but of course, back then I didn't. Fast forward 20 years or so, when I started to get involved in suicide prevention, and I thought things had changed. I thought there would be resources now. I mean, a certain amount, a lot of time had passed. How could it not? But it really wasn't until a friend of actually Govan's and mine said her husband died by suicide, and I had given her information that had warning signs and risk factors for suicide. And she looked at it and she said to me, no one ever said that a previous attempt was a risk factor for someone dying by suicide. She said, you know, she lost her husband to suicide, and he had been admitted for suicide attempt previously. She thought, she had the attitude like, well, he got that out of his system. He's learned from it. He's going to move on. She's like, no one told me that he was at higher risk for dying by suicide. So that's when it started to enter my mind that we should probably do something for families and make them aware of what's going on too. But it wasn't until I was doing a support group for attempt survivors called Suicide Anonymous. And a young woman came in with her mother. And her mother wanted to come into the meeting, and we said, sorry, it's closed, you can't. And she was just angry. You could tell the mother just radiated anger. And this young woman told us she was going to community college, and her mother dropped her off in the morning to class. Her mother picked her up after every class. Her mother screened every phone call she got. And I believe her mother also removed the door to her bedroom. So her mother was watching every move and monitoring everything. And you know, we said to the woman, well, you know, she's only afraid she's going to lose you. And the woman was like, yeah, I know. But at the end of the meeting, a friend of mine and I were walking to the car, and you know, I remember because it was like the first time in 10 years that I wanted a cigarette. And my friend looked at me and said, she's going to attempt again, isn't she? And I said, I'm afraid so. I called the woman a couple of times. I never heard back. I don't know what happened. I hope she went on to live a happy, normal life. But that's when I thought, I got to do something. So I wrote the pamphlet, After Attempt, the Emotional Impact of a Suicide Attempt on Families, and distributed that to every hospital in Pennsylvania. I still get phone calls, and all the phone calls I get now are just, I have someone in my family who attempted suicide and I don't know what to do. There's nothing, I can't find anything. Can you please help me? Do you know where I can go for help? That is always the thing that people want to know. So I feel like there's still so much work to be done about this. And, you know, families aren't aware aren't informed about suicide and suicidality. They don't understand all this. And a lot of times it never enters people's minds that this is a possibility. And if it doesn't enter your mind, you're not going to think about it. So I really believe if we can help and educate the families, we will help the suicide attempt survivor too, and hopefully prevent them from attempting or again. I talked about the demand. This is the data from 2021 from the CDC, and it's recorded that 12.3 million people seriously thought about suicide, 3.5 made a plan, and almost 2 million people attempted suicide. So there's definitely a demand and a need for this. If you think that almost 2 million people a year attempt suicide, and this is probably underreported. Chances are, there are a lot more attempts that who aren't reported to who don't go to the hospital or anything like that, or never tell anyone. So this is a huge issue. I developed a mailing list that was geared for families. I sent out a survey saying, would you be interested in a webinar series? And if so, here are a bunch of topics. Which ones would you like and how would you rank them? And from that, I created this series of 5 webinars, which people loved it. And after that, I developed it into a course, online course, which the people who took it loved it, but I couldn't financially, I just couldn't maintain it. So I ended up taking it down and haven't really done anything about it until Govan and I were talking one day, and I said, well, I have this thing that maybe I could do a workshop, and he said, let's do it. So that's how I got here. So the topics I'm going to talk about in this workshop are the impact of a suicide attempt on everyone in the family. How do you help the suicidal person, and how do you help other members of the family? Communication. This is, and I'll get into that. That's one of my biggest topics, I think. Insight into the suicidal mind. I believe if we understand something, we're not as afraid of it. Self-care and self-compassion with such an emotionally charged and difficult subject is essential. And then learning to thrive. Can you make something positive out of this? Can you make this into a learning experience and growth? So the impact of the family is, the first thing I talk about is what is trauma and why are the suicide attempts traumatic? I think a lot of times we overlook that part about it, but they are traumatic and they affect the whole family. So I go over the symptoms of trauma, and I also discuss trauma and grief, because if someone in your family attempts suicide, that changes you. And it changes everyone in the family. And so the life as you knew it before that is over, and you're going to have a new normal. And that's why there's this sense of grief, a sense of a loss of innocence in a way. And it's kind of related, but not real. A friend of mine, my husband's best friend, recently died unexpectedly. And the first thing I did for our friend's wife is I asked her if she wanted resources on traumatic grief. And she responded, traumatic grief? I didn't know there was such a thing. And I thought, that's usually what people say. And that's what they usually say about trauma too. So that's why, and it's traumatic grief isn't really all that far removed from this. So that's why I also want to include that and talk about it. And I want to really bring home the point that suicide attempts are traumatic. So I give the definition and the impact of the attempt on family members. And then, what good is all that if you don't provide tools for them to cope with all that? So here's just the definition of the trauma that I start off everything with, which you can read and you probably already know. So trauma is often associated, or a traumatic event is associated with violence. It can occur at any stage. It can be a child dying before the parent, a cancer as a teen, parent dying at a young age, a personal illness, a job loss before retirement. These things can all be traumatic. So why not a suicide attempt as well? My husband had a heart attack, and it started off as just this pain in his chest, and it ended up being 3 weeks later, he's in ICU and on life support. and I'm signing papers for a heart transplant. So that was traumatic. I recognized that, but it never occurred to me that he didn't recognize it until he was home for several weeks. And I realized that he was watching all these shows about I survived and survival things. And that's when I realized, I think he is suffering from trauma. You know, I think he needs some education here. The common reactions after someone attempts suicide can vary from family member to, you know, person to person. Some people get angry, some people feel despair or powerlessness, and it's everyone in the family. It's not just the parent or the spouse, it's everyone. It's the children, it's the siblings. There's a great deal of guilt and shame that's associated with this. So that's why I talk about that. And I think we often overlook the shame portion of it. So I'd like to touch on that. And the grief and how, you know, that feeling of sadness and going through the motions and hopelessness, which is similar to trauma. And of course, people will experience this in varying degrees, and the feelings of powerlessness and anger. And then again, the coping strategies. I provide coping strategies for children all the way up to adults to help them get through this. So the event has happened, that someone has attempted or nearly attempted suicide. What now? How can you help the person? Well, the first thing is, how do you make the environment safe? How can you restrict access to the means? Can you lock up the guns? Can you put the bullets separate from the guns? Can you get deal out the medication yourself, or get rid of poisons, that kind of thing? How can you make it hard for the attempt survivor to try again? How do you talk with the person? I mean, you don't want to have that sense of feeling like you're walking on eggshells all the time. So how do you get around that? How do you not feel that way? So I talk about how to ask the question of if you're suicidal or not, and also how not to ask the question. Can you find the balance where you can talk openly and freely about suicidality? And even, can you create a shorthand that you can talk about it easily, such as on a scale from 1 to 10, where are you to, how are you? So that you know if it's getting worse or if you need to intervene or something like that. And where to go and how to get help. And safety planning. Can you work together to do a safety plan? And here's an example of a safety plan. It uses internal coping strategies and external coping strategies, then outside sources. The first step is to identify the triggers. What is it that makes you go down that suicide rabbit hole? Can you tell what that is? And then when that starts, what can you do internally, or what coping mechanisms do you have? Can you distract yourself somehow, or whatever it is? Then if that doesn't work, can you go to the coffee shop or go to the library, go to a movie? Will that help you? And if that doesn't work, who can you call? Who is a trusted person that you can talk to about that? And if that person's not available or people aren't available, then do you have a therapist or a doctor you can talk to? And then of course there's always 988, or you can text the crisis text line. And then how do you keep the environment safe? And finally, what is the one thing that is worth living for? So that you can always think about that to encourage you to stay alive. What's the one thing that maybe it's your children, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your dogs, but what is the one thing that you feel you need to stay alive for? And then I provide additional tools like a hope box and websites, other apps you can use that that can help a suicidal person. So then I have the third module is on communication, because I feel like a lot of our issues boil down to problems in communication, and we're not taught how to communicate in school. At least I wasn't. It wasn't until I took a lay chaplaincy course that I learned about active listening and how to communicate. So I go over the types of communication like verbal and nonverbal. I also feel listening is a form of communication. So I talk about roadblocks to prevent you from listening, roadblocks that stop the conversation, that make it so the person doesn't want to open up to you. What things that you say that can cause a roadblock can make it worse. And then empathy. Can you develop empathy? And not for the act, but for the person and for why it happened, how, and not just the family member, but can the attempt survivor also develop empathy for the family member? So it works both ways. But empathy is extremely important in any kind of healing or communication or assistance, or even, I feel just day-to-day life, it helps to have empathy for other people. This is just the process of the sender has a thought, and so they get the words together and then they send it. However, is it text, is it in person, is it a phone call, email, however, and then the receiver takes what the sender sent and decodes it, and then provides feedback, encodes their thoughts and provides feedback, so that you can make sure that you got it straight. And I have this other slide, which is just I meant to hide it, and I forgot. But so the speaker says something that hopefully conveys what they mean. The listener hears it, and then they convey what they heard back to the person. And you can tell that there's areas where this can all go wrong. The speaker can think they're saying something, but they're not including everything. And an example would be a woman tells her husband to pick up a gallon of milk after work on his way home from work. So he picks up a gallon of milk on his way home from work. And when he comes home, he gives her the milk, and it's chocolate milk, but she wanted white milk. She wanted regular milk. She didn't say that, but she just had that in her mind. She just figured she didn't think about it. He, on the other hand, had taken a picture of the chocolate milk and texted it to her, but she didn't see the text because she was having trouble. So that's again where the communication failed, not through any fault of theirs, but through the medium of the communication. So there's lots of areas where you can have a problem with this. I feel that family members and support people are pretty much, I like to call them informal counselors. They help people. They may not have the training, but they know how to help you. They know you best, and they provide the advice and assistance when you need it. So this may seem a lot for family members, but I don't think so. I think this is important for anybody's everyday life. And so I also include a little bit of motivational interviewing, even though, although I don't actually say that. But I just want to expand people's horizons on both listening and talking clearly. And what I like about all this active listening and motivational interviewing is that, acceptance is the key. You need to, you need that absolute worth, that belief that a person has an intrinsic value, or as Carl Rogers put it, worth in their own right. And that's essential. So you accept the person, you acknowledge that I want to hear what you have to say. What you have to say is valuable, and I want to hear it, and I want to honor that. And I may not agree with everything, but I will still honor your decisions. So it's the absolute worth, empathy, autonomy, and affirmation are the essential and the groundwork for needed to accept a person and develop a partnership for change. And also, when you are that way, you tend not to be judgmental, and that encourages the person to A, want to talk to you more, and B, it also encourages them to want to change on their own, to find the answers within to help change them, whatever it is that they need to be changing. And then I also do a little on crisis evaluation, de-escalation, just some tips so that they can help themselves or each other if someone starts to go in a crisis. And just talking about the anxiety phase, defensive phase, the acting out phase, and then the recovery phase. Just something to have in their back pocket should they need it. I mentioned previously that I believe if you can understand something, it won't have as much fear around it. It won't be as fearful. So I like to talk about a lot of people who are suicidal have common characteristics. And I also like to explain the various theories on suicide and talk about ambivalence. So the common characteristics are that there are common cognitive distortions that a lot of us, well, I think most of us have. And then there's other distortions like rigidity. And I like to, Edwin Steinman's a father of modern suicidality, and his theory of suicidality is very interesting, I find. And he also coined the term psychic, which I also like other people to become aware of that term. There's the attention-mediated hopelessness model. I'm not sure if I'll include Beck Wenzel model, but I like it because it talks about schemas and how, the lens through which you look through life and how that can be different for different people. And there's a suicide one and a depressive one, but I don't know if I'll have time for that. And then Thomas Joyner's theory of thwarted belongingness, acquired lethality, and perceived burdensomeness. And I really feel like Schneidman's psych-ache describes the emotional and mental anguish a person is in when they are suicidal. Because I think sometimes it's hard for other people to understand that unless they're told about it. But the pain that one is in is at that, when you're suicidal, can be excruciating, which is why you want to die, because you want to end the pain. But the only way you know how to end your pain is to die, which also brings you into the ambivalence, because you don't necessarily want to die, you want to end your pain. So how can you, why is that important? And then how can you capitalize on that? Because it's important to capitalize on that ambivalence in order to help the person to find ways, reasons for living, if you can capitalize on the ambivalence. I mentioned this is such a hard topic. This is so difficult and it's emotionally charged. And so it's essential that people, everyone, practice self-care and self-compassion. I go over the characteristics of stress. What does stress look like? I talk a little about compassion fatigue because I believe anybody can get compassion fatigue. It doesn't have to be healthcare workers. And then what good is talking about all this if you don't give tools for coping with the stress? So I like to talk to people, make them aware of the behavioral symptoms of stress, cognitive, physical, emotional. Are there stomach aches? Are you drinking more? Are you having difficulty concentrating? Are you quick to anger? That kind of thing. And compassion fatigue, or as Dr. Figley wrote, is the phenomenon associated with the cost of caring. Because especially if you live with someone who is struggling with mental health issues or suicidality. I think I mentioned I have chronic suicidality and it ebbs and flows. So it's certainly not easy for my husband. And I often think there must be times when he's sick of hearing about it. And I think that's understandable. So I think it can be for anybody. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with cerebral atrophy, and so it started off with her walking, and then she couldn't walk anymore. And then after that, and it continued like up her body. It was like, and so all she could really do was talk. Her mind was great. She didn't have any problems with her mind, but her body wasn't working. And my father-in-law took care of her. And when we visited, I noticed that a lot of times he would say, well, we could do that, but because of Helen, her name was Helen, we can't. And which I thought, that must make Helen feel awful. But the other thing I noticed is if he had a little trouble with a wheelchair or something, he got very angry. And I could tell he was just, he was irritated by things. And I think looking back, he had compassion fatigue, which again, it's understandable if you're with someone 24/7. But the thing is, it can become destructive, and it can prevent you from being the caring person that you normally are. And it can also lead to depression or increased drug and alcohol use. So it is important to recognize it and then also cope with it and find ways to deal with it. What are some factors that influence your stress tolerance level? Do you have a support network? Do you have a sense of control? How do you react? How easily do you let go of anger? Are you able to turn to someone for help easily? These are all things that influence how you react to stress. And then I talk about the 4 A's of stress management, which is avoid the stressor, alter the stressor, adapt to the stressor, or accept the stressor. And self-care can take many forms: behavioral, physically, emotionally. You can go for a walk or in the woods, anything that can feed your soul, that can put that oil back in the lamp so the light can burn again. Just maybe a piece of chocolate, it can be anything to help you, but self-care is essential for everyone. And Dr. Kristen Neff has developed the concept of self-compassion. She has a website, and I believe she has books. I know she also does speaking engagements. But her premise is that you notice your own suffering, especially when it comes from our own self-judgment and self-criticism. Can you comfort and soothe yourself? Can you be kind and caring in your response to the suffering? Can you be open-hearted towards yourself as you are towards others? And she pointed out, plus the advantage is you're always there. You know, you're there 24/7 if you need it. And so she talks about using kind, caring, soothing language with ourselves, and not to be so harshly critical and judgmental of ourselves, and to be accepting, to acknowledge our personal shortcomings. And because you care about yourself, you want to be happy, so you want to self-improve. She also goes on to say that physical gestures such as hugging yourself or stroking yourself also release oxytocin, which is that feel-good hormone, that the love hormone. So it really is a great way to help yourself. I struggle, to be honest, I struggle with this. It's hard for me to do this, but since I started to become aware of it, I've noticed that I'm not as harsh on myself, and just decreasing that just a little bit has just made my life exponentially easier. So I thought it would be good to include that as well. And then learning to thrive. How can we build the resilience? There's a thing called post-traumatic growth. And then do you want to turn that into something? Do you want to become advocates? And resilience is, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, of trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of strength. So, such as family and relationship problems, health problems, workplace, financial stressors, and also a suicide attempt. The good thing about resilience is that it's not a trait, but it's a learnable skill. So you can develop resilience. And if you can develop resilience in children, you're giving them a skill that helps throughout life. And I think that's the good behavior game, I believe it is, that in places where that is was implemented there, and they tracked them for several years through high school, there were less suicide attempts and depression for the children who had the good behavior game, which helped develop resilience. So resiliency skills are extremely important. So I discuss ways you can improve resilience, and from children all the way up through to adults, and talk about the 7 learnable skills of resilience that Karen Rivik has written about. And the 7 skills are emotion awareness or regulation, impulse control, optimism, causal analysis or problem solving, empathy, self-efficacy, and reaching out. A great book to learn about post-traumatic growth is Dr. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor, And his book talks about that. And then he went on to, he was one of the forerunners of modern psychology. And it's just a wonderful book. And that really demonstrates, I think, post-traumatic growth. But it's how can you make positive psychological change as a result of a struggle with highly challenging life circumstance? What are the elements for post-traumatic growth are to learn or look at or develop new opportunities and new possibilities. How do you relate to others? A lot of times that improves or changes. You have a greater appreciation for other people, a sense of empowerment, a greater appreciation for life, and then spiritual or religious growth, which are the 5 dimensions of growth. And then advocacy, because a lot of times people say, well, that was, you know, especially with suicide and the stigma and the silence around it, once they've been through it and they've been helped, they want to help make sure that other people don't go through what they went through. And also it can, you know, there's different forms of advocacy. There's self and there's peer and there's group and citizen. And then there's an element of doing some self-assessment and seeing if you want to tell your story and if you're ready to tell your story. I would never inflict 8 hours of just me talking on anyone. So the workshop will have exercises. I'm writing out a safety plan, communication exercises, and then maybe after the communication module, or maybe even after the insight to suicidal mind, doing a safety plan again, seeing if your approach to it changed at all. I have videos on how not to ask the suicide question, and nonverbal communication, which is from The Office, so it's funny. And videos from Everybody Love Raymond, which actually has great videos on active listening. And then I also include worksheets and resources that they can take home and use. So because this will be the first workshop, it's going to be fluid. Some things are going to be fluid. So some things, there may not be time to include some things, you know, I don't know yet everything, but there will be a survey and evaluation at the end of it. And in that we'll determine, does content need to be deleted? Does content need to be expanded? Should it be a 2-day workshop? And that sort of thing. And then we'll go from there. So to recap, the topics that I include are impact on the family, how to help, communications, insight, self-care and self-compassion, and learning to thrive. I tried very hard to develop this with keeping in mind an underlying principle of love and acceptance, that, you know, people want to be loved and they want their love to be accepted. And I think that if you learn some of these tools, that you become more open-hearted, that this workshop has the capability to be transformational, really, that plus these things can be learned everywhere and anywhere. It doesn't have to be just within the family. It can really broaden your horizon and make you see life in a different way and give you tools that you didn't have before. So hopefully they'll absorb the message that we all deserve to be loved, respected, and heard, to openly give and receive the love and support we need. And I really hope to achieve this by talking so much about compassion and empathy and gaining issues of self, of gaining understanding of the issues and turning the blame switch off. Now, the workshop will be on September 13th. We're still debating the exact location. But I think that's it for now. And I'll open it up to questions if there are any.
So Heidi, I want to thank you first of all. That was really great, and the workshop has the potential to really cause hope and meaning for the families that are just struggling right now, because we know that the attempt survivor is struggling with wanting to live, but we really also know that it's after the attempt or even during that struggle that the family struggles as well, is what to do, what to say, if it's the right thing or not to do. And it's a shared struggle that most people don't know don't know where to reach out. So this can provide a lot. And for those who don't know, Heidi's on our national board of directors. But one of our things for Suicide Prevention Alliance is to start the conversation. And for attempt survivors, that conversation really hasn't been started, let alone the families that struggle. So one, I want to thank you for doing the work that you do and starting the conversation with not only attempt survivors, but families as well. So one of the things, and we'll open it up then, I just have a question for you. If you were to leave the people that have attended today, and thank you for everybody who has, is there a key question, or maybe it's an answer or a statement that would help start the conversation? We talk about, as you did, empathy, compassion, support, but where do we start at? If you could leave us with at least one goal that each person can walk away with, just starting today. How do we just generate? We talk about empathy, but some people can't exhibit empathy. So what can we do? Or what would you like to see? Let alone with you, or definitely people that who are currently struggling today.
When I was growing up, whenever I hurt myself, my father would say, physically, what the hell did you do that for? And when I was a teenager, I always wanted to say, just to tick you off. That's what, and that's not how I want people to react. What I want is when someone is suicidal and say, I want them, instead of saying, how could you do that? Or how could you do that to me? Or what were you thinking? Instead, to approach it as, you must have been in a lot of pain. Like, how did you get there? And what can I do to ease that pain? Is there anything I can do? How can I help you? How can we help you together? I think I would like to see that as the key, the first step towards working together. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we know that with the LGBTQ plus community is that they say that they have one trusted adult that they can turn to, that increases their lifespan exponentially, that it doesn't, that hopefully it's just having someone understand. But I think that's one of the keys though with attempt survivors, right? It's that I think that it's not just with certain communities, it's with everybody who is struggling out there. If someone can say, again, I hate the words I understand, but if someone could really just empathize with them and just say, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to walk through your journey with you, can be really important.
Yeah, I I am extremely fortunate that I have a husband who I can talk to about this, who will listen to me. And, you know, there have been times when he has said, do we need a hospital? Do you need to go in the hospital? Or are you going to be okay? Can you deal with this? You know, and he can talk to me about it. 9 times out of 10, just talking about it openly and freely reduces the pain I'm in. And plus there's something, and motivational interviewing does this too, talks about this too. There's something about verbalizing it that helps you to see things clearly. Or you know how you often ask a question, as you're asking it, you get the answer, you know, it's kind of like that. And I also am fortunate that I have 2 close friends that who are attempt survivors. And so I know that if it gets really, really bad and say my husband's not around or whatever, I can reach out to them. So I am extremely fortunate to have those things. And I think, yes, those things would be essential for anyone to live.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm nodding to you. No one can see me. I'm nodding to you, and you can't see me. But however, thank you for that. Anybody have any questions right now? Because I have some more questions for Heidi as well. Please, I want to open it up to anybody who wants to, or they can write it down in the chat, or they can go ahead and talk.
I can ask a question.
Hi, Kay.
Hi. So my name is Kay Bella, and I'm also an attempt survivor. I think one of the challenges I really face is that I really feel like I can be there for other people, but when it comes to, like, I tried to talk to, like, for instance, my sister after my last attempt and communicate how I was feeling, the depth of my hurt, and, you know, like, have an honest conversation with her and just let her know, you know, my family has been a big influencer. And it always ends up being turned around to making it about them and making me feel bad for them. And again, I can empathize, I can understand how hard it is for the family going through it. But I think especially for me, it has been repeatedly more painful to try to communicate and explain myself and help others to understand. And so I end up, you know, I think some of my suicidal thoughts became because I was internalizing everything and I was just bottling it up. So I was trying to work on communicating it and opening up to others. But then there's this unsafety and this vulnerability of, like, opening yourself up, because then people do know what's going on. And then, you know, you're almost hurt even more. So I guess when it comes to kind of communication and kind of maybe, yeah, just kind of hearing, like, thoughts on that. At this point, I kind of try not to engage with those people. If I recognize that, I try to say my piece, but I would say it is really hard. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, it is really hard. And unfortunately, it is often within family that happens. And that's why, and maybe I'm being too much of a Pollyanna here, but I'm hoping that if you can, like, if the family could attend a workshop like this to you know, realize that it wasn't personal, that it's not about, it wasn't meant to hurt them. Like, there's another side. I mean, some people are incapable of that. Unfortunately, they just can't. But the important thing then is if you can find someone who is a trusted person who can listen to you non-judgmentally and not turn it into, you know, this really affected my life, this really hurt me, this really made it difficult, and now because, you know, that kind of thing. You know, I don't have the great answer, but I have hope. And I think, you know, a workshop like this might start to enable that to happen.
and also start the conversation, right? I think it opens up
Right,
a variety of different um,
right.
of people in our family or in our friend or support network that'll hopefully walk away with say, I get it a lot better now. Because I think because of the myths that are out there shape our lives even before we, possibly have family members get in the situation, and what do we do? And then sometimes we rely on, our families and our friends that are telling us all the wrong things, that we need to actually get to that right resource, get to that right type of training, and start and being open into asking these questions. We haven't done that as a society, especially with attempt survivors. I think we bridged a lot with more loss survivors, but we still have work to do there too. But attempt survivors are that unknown, and I think the more we have attempt survivors speak out and say what their needs are, the more that we could fit trainings to fit and how to help what their needs are.
I mean, I was just thinking, my family, I mean, they were not safe, and they definitely did not have any communication skills. And I just remember I was in therapy, and my therapist said, "Well, if you're angry with me, why don't you say so?" And I just looked at him like a deer in headlights, and I'm like,
Yeah.
because it never occurred to me. I mean, I wasn't taught. Oh my God, you say you're angry? Are you kidding me?
Mhm.
So, but I never really went to my family for help, but I know that there are families where, and maybe if early on they had something like this, it would have helped. I don't know, but it's not going to help every family. But I think especially the families who are willing and want to go to the workshop, will have the greater success of it helping.
I don't think this is going anywhere else. So, I mean, we have to start from somewhere, right?
Right.
And again, it's starting the conversation. It's starting people being open with one another and kind of finding out. And we all learn from each other, right? But you're that great conduit, and as far as what you're proposing here is really going to be a lot of great information where people don't know where to go at all into talking about this. So I'm hopeful that everybody here can start kind of spreading that word, that just in the topics that alone and everything that needs to be going on with this, Heidi, is that it's not just you're gonna not like doing a QPR. Don't get me wrong, I love QPR, but it's not a quick fix, right? And even a day-long workshop is not necessarily the fix for it, but it starts opening the conversation, starts finding out what people's needs are, find out more what we need to do, to help out, those families, those who are impacted by that attempt, and vice versa. The more that the attempt survivor knows that, that they can comfortably reach out, the more hopefully that'll provide hope to that attempt survivor that, oh my gosh, they even took a training to try and, to understand me better.
And I forgot to mention this too, that it's also helpful for the attempt survivor, because I know personally I didn't know anything about cognitive distortions till I read about it in Tom Ellis and Corey Newman's book, Choosing to Live, and he had all these cognitive distortions and things, and I was like, I mean, I was like, oh my God, I do this, I do that, I do, and it really opened my eyes, and just like, oh, I can change this thinking, I can work with this I can work with, and so, and that really made a difference in my life and with my suicidality. So I just want to throw that out there too. I think somebody raised their hand.
Yeah, Karen, I think, has her hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. My 19-year-old son had tried it, and not only once, but I found out 2 times within 2 months. Now, this past year, I have had a lot of health issues, and down the road, it's not going to be pretty. How can I um, approach um, that subject with my son? I don't know if you want to get into it on this platform, but I'm sure there are other people who have sickness or illness in their families, and just a roundabout, how do you address that?
I want to make sure I understand. So, well, I guess I don't understand what you're asking. Are you asking that because of your health issues, you won't be able to help your son?
I mean, I'm kind of, it's hard because, like, I want to be able to be open with my son because reality is reality. But do I really? You know what I mean? Should I approach it? Should I not approach it? I'm not exactly sure what to do with it.
How old is your son?
19 and a half, 19. Yeah.
So he's virtually an adult.
Yeah, he lives on his own by himself.
So why couldn't you?
I just don't want to make it worse.
And this is, you know what? Right there, you got it. Start with that. I don't want to make it worse, and I don't know how to do this, but how can, but I think this is something you should know. And so can we work together?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope.
Thanks, Karen. That was an important question because there's the big myth out there that if, people are thinking about suicide, that we shouldn't broach the issue or ask the question. And I think we need to one, have an understanding on what's going on with them, but to know that we care enough to ask that question. And I'm sure, Heidi, you'll agree with that. And that if we ignore the problem, then that, that attempt might go toward a death from suicide. So we ask, the person on what their needs are and how we can help them, and then go out and try and find those resources. There's lots of resources out there. But yeah, and hopefully, you can attend that session in September to find out even more what you could do to help your son. And I wish you all the best of that. But don't forget, again, with your health issues, take care of self. And that's what it's all about, is it, we're helping the attempt survivor, but we also got to remember we can't help people until we help ourselves. And self-care sometimes goes out the window when attempting to help, those who are loved ones who are thinking about suicide. That's a huge struggle. And I'm not going to take up time because I see Janice has a question.
Are you finished with that other one?
I think so.
My question is, we have finally gotten to the point, I think, where we can say trauma, and that has kind of almost become part of the fabric of families and communities. How can we somehow then use that to our advantage? I don't want to say to our advantage, but how can we use that to segue into, like, these may be reasons why, or I don't know. I mean, I'm in the part of the state where either nothing's talked about, no one wants to admit anything, or God will take care of everything. So, I mean, I've tried to start some dialogues several times, and I just can't get anything going. But knowing that we talk about trauma now, if that could be woven in somehow, at least as a stepping stone, if you will.
Yeah, kind of like a backdoor approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think, you don't have to, if you can't face it head on, start that way, start talking about trauma and start talking about things that are traumatic in our lives, and then you can say suicide.
Right. So how do you get even any interest in that?
Well, that's,
Because I'm like, I'm going to be a one-woman machine here because I can't, everybody talks about it, but nobody talks about it enough to want to do it.
but yet we know they're there. Statistically speaking, we know they're there. I think I think my Pennsylvania Dutch stubbornness helped me. I just thought, I'm not letting go of this, and I'm just going to keep talking about it until until I die, basically. If you can find other people with your beliefs, and I'm sure they are people, teachers, they know this is an issue. If they talk to their students, they've got to know this.
Mhm.
Family doctors, things like that. If you can find some kind of ally, because they are out there, then you can probably make
Mhm.
start to make some headway.
Okay. I may talk to you a little later
Okay.
if I have your email or whatever, but
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
In fact, I'm gonna give that now. Go ahead.
So Kay stated to everybody in the chat, how do we keep how do we get the conversation going? I put in context that they understand. If they're a mechanic, I put it in machine terms. If I learn something about their story and a big challenge they had in their lives, I help them understand trauma and issues in their context. Thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, I don't really care what it is I need to do to get there. I'm just, trying to figure, because I had some suicidal ideation, and a lot of it came about because of trauma. And then I had reckless behavior because of the trauma, and like everything snowballed at one time. And, it started out as a slow spiral, and I'm like, yeah. And then all of a sudden it started getting smaller and smaller until, I had this, my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? There's only one way to get out of it, and I don't say I can't, but I'm having difficulty getting people to even start the discussion. And I don't know, do I have an open thing like at Shady Maple and you pay for everybody's dinner to come, or like, what do you do? I don't know what to do.
What about a training? Could you do a training on some kind of suicide prevention there to help start the conversation, and maybe that'll open up the door?
I don't know that I personally have enough of education to do that, and I wouldn't want to give someone any kind of suggestion or anything.
I know
I mean,
in our county,
if I had someone to do it with, and then I could, kind of be part of something else, I don't mind getting it all started. I think I just need to have someone accompany me who has that additional set of knowledge.
Janice, where are you located?
We are in Lancaster County, in like the Garden Spot School District.
I know exactly where you're
Yeah.
at.
We're around nothing but like field.
There's some cows. There are some cows. I have been up in that direction quite recently. There's some cows and lots of field.
Yeah, but we're in this area where, like God in
But
your
the
heart
good
and everything will be different.
the good news is you're not outside of areas that can be helpful. So you're kind of a lot closer. I was fully expecting, not to say Lancaster compared to where I'm at here in Southeast Pennsylvania, Delaware County. You know, it's not that far away, but you did put your information in the chat, right? Like your,
Yes.
at least your
Mhm.
email? All
Yeah.
right, what I can do, and I'm sure Govan is nodding his head, he thinks no one else can see him, but I pulled the pin off of Heidi, so he's been able to be seen for quite a
Oh, you
while.
got caught.
But what we can do is we can definitely give you some resources and just some things that can get you started and just kind of connect that way, right?
That would
We
be
can start the
great.
conversation with you, and thus you can start the conversation, you know, forward and see how it fits your particular area. So
That would be very helpful.
absolutely, absolutely. And you're not nearly as, you know, out in the cow pastures as you might think. Lancaster's only about an hour and a half from me, so, but
Yeah.
I'll definitely reach out with you.
Okay, great.
And is this Lancaster, you're talking about Lancaster, PA, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in Lancaster, PA. There's actually there's a suicide prevention coalition. There's, you know, there's lots of things that you can get involved with there.
Yeah, the thing always with is for us to do anything down here in this part of the state, everything's like an hour drive, and I know people aren't going to do that.
Yeah, the coalition meetings are virtual, so
Yeah.
you should be able
Oh,
to
okay,
still
okay.
attend them. Yeah.
Okay. I meant for them to attend.
Oh,
For
yeah.
other people. Mhm.
Yeah.
See, I didn't even have to send an email. That was great. No.
Yeah, I'm not connected to that organization anymore, but I was leading it as of like a couple weeks ago, so that's why I'm very familiar with it. I know previously they've done things like movie showings. You were asking like how you can get people involved. Sometimes it's stuff like that where like you show a movie that has that kind of topic related and then turn it into a discussion after. And yeah, there's lots of mental health professionals and stuff. I'll also put.
I've also looked at some of these, you know, resources, and, you know, they go, this is how you get people to da, 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 da. And I'm like, they make it sound like so simple, and really it's not.
Yeah.
And I know I have to start from the ground up. That's just, I know that's the way it is. I'm just looking for other people to, you know, help me climb out of the hole, basically.
Yeah, and as far as like how do we get the conversation going, that was really that was with like my husband. Like my husband's a stubborn Albanian male, and he just like doesn't understand a lot of the sensitive mental health stuff. And so it'd be like the same way that I get emotional this way, you get angry in that way and stuff like that. I'm putting it in personal context.
I've
But
thought about doing like a meetup group.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know if that provides enough anonymity, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I'll talk to people and see kind of the best way to go about it, but.
Okay, and actually I have a meetup group for Lancaster Mental Health Connection. I'll put that in the chat, and then if you have any events, we can put that on there. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Okay.
I want to reflect back to Heidi, because Heidi started when really there was nobody starting the conversation. And she, you know, took the bull by the horn and just, you know, this is back in the mid 90s, you know, where again, nothing was being done, and she started a lot of the suicide prevention efforts herself. So Heidi would probably be the best person to answer this question. What do you do? Because you started kind of just on your own, and there wasn't a huge audience out there. So any suggestions on if anybody does want to start up, you know, groups in the area, because we know that, you know, Lancaster County does have a lot of resources, but then you're talking about those northern counties in PA that really don't have any resources or lack thereof. So I'm going to shut up and let Heidi speak on that. So,
and I think it has people face their own vulnerabilities, and that's not an easy thing to do.
absolutely. Heidi, you want to offer some suggestions of how to get started or how to get people involved?
I mean, I was lucky. I had a dinner conversation with my minister. We invited him and his wife over for dinner which wasn't itself a miracle because we don't entertain ever, but, and we start talking about my brother's suicide and how I wish that there was something, and I start talking about this statistics that I had learned, and I said, I wish there was something I could do about it. And he came back to me 2 weeks later and said, I just keep thinking about our conversation and maybe there is something. So, I mean, and then we started, we asked for volunteers, and we got volunteers, and now there's even volunteer match, you can do it online. It's easier. And then just through connections and just sending out, we sent out letters, we sent out postcards, we sent out things, we just, and eventually, people, like there was a couple, it would amaze me, like it would be like a year later and somebody would remember and pull up my email, say that they pulled up my email and call me and bring me in for a training because they had remembered that email that I sent a year ago, so you never know it may not bear fruit right away. It may take
Right.
a while.
Well, I have to give kudos to Heidi, because when I first started, I went to my first suicide prevention meeting, with, those leading state efforts, and I met Heidi. And what I was immediately, one of the questions that I asked is, why is this older adult an adult instead of older adult, and youth? And what I got answered was kind of egos. And I thought, do I really want to get involved with, egos in suicide prevention efforts and PA? So I walked out in the parking lot. I intended to ask Heidi a 5-minute question or a 5-minute conversation from one question. And then I ended up in the 2 hours later in the parking lot. And what I left was, she gets it. She gets me. She understands, the impact of being a loss survivor, but what we can do if we all work together and helping people who get them involved in suicide prevention efforts and just really starting the conversation. And that's the only reason I'm involved today. It's that Heidi kind of, just had that, I'm sure she had to go home, sure she wanted to eat at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And here at 7 o'clock, we're still talking in the parking lot. So Janice, it's all about, you started here, go to our conference, come to this training. It's meeting different people, Kay's in Lancaster County, you start meeting people all over, and all of a sudden you're that important cog into doing things, in suicide prevention, getting training, teaching, like something like QPR, going to assist trainings. It's really just getting involved. If you want to make a difference, then it's all about getting involved and meeting, people who can help you reach whatever goals that you have.
Okay.
So, and again, Heidi's at the top left-hand corner right now, but everything falls from Heidi because she really made a difference in Pennsylvania, and she's left a good, graph, downward into all the people that are now working in suicide prevention. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? I know we'll come up to the half hour where we said we get off. Anybody else have important question? Okay. Well, I want to thank you for coming today. And I had a couple more questions, but then that takes more than just 5 or 10 minutes. So I'm hoping that you guys will come, for all who attended today. And because we just talked about, the things that Heidi's going to teach, but we get to have more in-depth discussion once we're there. And again, I think, as kind of Heidi taught me in doing QPR, is just like, we need to engage with our audience, and that's what we want to do with you and everybody else who comes. And there's a lot to go through, but hopefully a lot of conversation will be started and a lot of questions will be answered. So and then we can really see what your needs are to hopefully show what we need to do in the future. And I'm going to give Heidi the last kind of words to wrap up all this up. And thank you, Heidi, for being here today.
Oh, no, thank you. And thank everybody for attending and showing an interest and asking questions. And um, I just really believe in this, and I just really hope this takes off, or that people will understand what I'm trying to do, and that it'll work, and that people will be helped, and that families will be helped. I just really believe in this, and I'm just grateful for this opportunity that GoVan's giving me to possibly, hopefully, make a difference in people's lives. So thank you.
Well, thank you, because, you know, again, learning from you, just having this conversation today, hopefully people can, you know, take something of value, you know, home, or know what they may have to do to help in the future. And really, one part of this is to engage in a class like this. Where else are you going to get this? I have, you know, I've searched all over for things, you know, and how to engage this audience. And I'm so thrilled that all of you did come today. Because like up until 5 minutes, like we were all worried about, is anybody going to come? And then you all came. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. And I know I speak for Heidi for coming today. And we really hope that you come on September 13th. Again, we're going to follow us on Facebook, Suicide Prevention Alliance. Again, you could follow us on our website, suicidepreventionalliance.org. Again, we'll be talking a little bit, you know, just more about it at our conference on August 8th and 9th. We hope you show up there. Let's see, Kelly has a quick question. Go ahead, Kelly. Or maybe that's a clapping.
She's clapping. She's
Oh.
clapping. This is why I'm here. I get it. It's okay.
Okay, so yes, I don't know all the emojis on here. So thank you again. Hope to see you. If you have any questions, please direct them to us, and you have Heidi's information. If you would like to, you know, have other things and topics that, you know, we should be talking about, please let us know, or something that Heidi should include that might, you know, be something that we can obviously talk about at the conference or have another webinar about this. So thank you so much, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll stay on if anybody has any private questions or whatever. So
Thank you.
You stop the recording?